Hello, America. Welcome to the Junto Podcast, where we promote the practical applications of critical thinking and bold creativity. I'm your host, Edgar Mills. Thank you for joining us. Hello, America. Welcome back to episode 61. I appreciate you guys following along with me. I appreciate the input that I get. And yeah, that's it. So what are we talking about today? I thought I was going to go with an easy breezy subject, and then I didn't. I'm gonna do something easy breezy sooner or later. But today we're gonna talk about a little bit about communism and democratic socialism and why I say those ideas. It's a single ideology, and why it still lingers today, and what we as classical liberals or libertarians, if you will, what do we got to do, man? We got to call it out, right? Everything I talk about, and the vast majority of my podcasts are framed up through a libertarian perspective, and you can read classical liberal on that. I'm not a complete anarchist, but the tenets are there, right? Individual liberty, voluntary cooperation, voluntary interaction, private property rights, limited government. Those are the things. But today we're going to highlight the empirical success of the free markets versus central planning. There's just boatloads of data that back up the success of the free markets over central planning. That's just the way it is. So yeah, that's what we're talking about today. Yeah. Communism, or as it has been rebranded, democratic socialism, that's not simply a case of good policy being poorly executed. That's not what it is. Now, these people who believe in these things they'll tell you this, but this is not the case at all, because you can see in history how that it's consistently performed very bad. Communism or democratic socialism, we will use those interchangeably throughout the rest of this episode. They're predictable. The failure is predictable because the doctrine is rooted in, either a denial or an ignorance of human nature. And it's also rooted in envy a bit, I think, if you go back all the way to Marx and look at that. But why does it linger in America? Why? Why do young people jump on board so easily and so readily? Well, it sounds good on the surface. It sells us empathy. Yeah, and that's good, right? And it sells us some future utopia of everything is even Steven and peaceful, and the government's benevolent and nobody hates anyone else and blah blah blah. But it sells that to the young and affluent, the college kids, especially in the Ivy Leagues and whatnot. It's not selling that to poor kids, really. I mean, it kind of is, right? And if you're a poor kid, you kind of like, oh man, yeah, I'm being oppressed. But we'll get to that. But it sells us those things, but it does it, the technique that it sells it with is sleight of hand. Because in one hand, we're getting all this idealistic, fair equality across the board. But the other hand is snaking away your rights, secretly digging in your pocket, incrementally pulling out rights, hard-earned rights, freedom. And those are the things, those individual rights and that freedom is what has, and the free market has lifted billions of human beings out of poverty. Yeah. So disturbingly enough, there are polls out there these days showing that Gen Z has a love affair with socialism and communism. at higher rates since the 1930s. Yeah. So prior to World War II, communism was getting a foothold. You know, England, man, anyway. And then World War II came along. Well, we saw some pretty atrocious shit from not only the Nazis, but the communists as well. And then the very minute World War II ended, what happened? The Cold War. Because we had hardcore ideological differences. Now, the classical liberal sort of libertarian answer is these young people have not experienced want or scarcity. These young people, these Gen Zs. And then, of course, everybody these days lives in their social media echo chamber. And then, of course, public school is, you can call me conspiracy theorist if you want, but it's indoctrination. We can go back historically and look at why public schools exist in the form that they do now. And that's been a disconnect for young people from, like, I mean, they teach history, but it's all shaped. It's always shaped, right? It don't matter what school you go to. They're going to take the history of the way they want you to look. But they skip over the atrocities of the Marxists and the left and the communists. They skip over the atrocities and the millions and millions and millions of dead to sell this ideology of equity or whatever they want to call it. And these young people, yeah, they romanticize this equality and this equity. They romanticize it. Of course, we want everybody to be equal. Of course, have equal opportunity. That's what we want, right? Equal opportunity for everyone. But they want equal outcomes no matter what. And that just ain't the way it is. You can't do it. You can't force equal outcomes. So they romanticize that equity a lot. And furthermore, they get bought into this fantastical version, this ideology, and they ignore and conveniently ignore the testimonies and the outcries of people who have escaped from these communist countries in recent years. Like, people who have lived it came to America and said, look, this is bad. We don't want this here. Don't fall for it. They write them off as some kind of, I don't know, pawns for the right, I guess. I'm not sure how they write those people off. But there's millions of immigrants in America who have escaped communism and are very passionate about it. Now, coming from my perspective, the Junto podcast ethos, we're striving for mutual improvement, right? A club of mutual improvement and progress and moving forward. Not progressivism. No, progress. Well, we have to look at objective history and reality to do that. Objectively, we can look and see that free markets work. We can. Rule of law, we need it. Like I said, I'm not a communist or a anarchist. I believe that we need law in America. There are those that will exploit lawlessness. And one that I've been hitting on the past few episodes is personal responsibility and accountability. If we hold people individually responsible, that works. That works. And then we have to reject, like these hyperbolic, sort of feel good, slogans and whatnot, and class and victimhood and class warfare. And we certainly have to avoid, their entire structure is built around the blame game. All their policies, everything is built around the blame game. The leftists, the communists. Yeah, it's not built on any positive forward-moving thing. It's built on what we blame them for this, so we're going to do the opposite. But they don't do the opposite. So we're going to take a second here. We're going to go through the body count. It's not funny. We're going to look at the body count, the communist body count. You can deny it all you want. You can compare, like, oh, well, that was this is blah, blah, that wasn't done correctly, blah, 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 blah. You can do all those things. You can say it. And all that's doing is that's internally, you're just making little excuses for yourself to not accept the numbers, the reality. So Marx and Engels did the Communist Manifesto was in 1948. Or I'm sorry, 1848. So a little more than 100 and change years old, and it was all about class warfare, all about it, all about the abolition of private property, and all about the sort of dictatorship of what they called the proletariat. What is the proletariat, people? What is it? It's the people, the workers, the regular folks. That's the proletariat. And and what everybody casually forgets is they want a ruling class to rule these people. But what they either fail to understand or don't want you to know is that this ruling class has an agenda. There's humans, and human nature takes over. And for whatever corruption you think the free market does, so does absolute control. No concept of human nature whatsoever. But it sounded sounded very ideal to them. Yeah. So then there was Lenin, and he was in power from 1917 to 1924. The Bolshevik Revolution is what led to the creation of the very first communist state. Right, that was it. So, and what did that give us? Well, what was affectionately known as the Red Terror. It gave us the secret police, the Cheka secret police, and it created the gulag system, right? The horrific place where they sent political prisoners. And that set the model. That was the model for all future communist nations. And that was a one party rule, right? Communist Party rules all. And they ruled by terror, not consensus, not any form of democracy whatsoever. It was by terror. And then we had Uncle Joe. Yeah, FDR and Winston Churchill affectionately referred to Joseph Stalin as Uncle Joe to humanize him. They wanted to humanize him for, whatever reason, talks and all that. Well, what was Uncle Joe responsible for, Joseph Stalin? Well, they did this collectivization of the state for sure, right? But have you ever heard of the Holodomor famine in Ukraine? Look that up. Literally millions of Ukrainians were purposely starved to death. Then they had the Great Purge, and of course continued on with the horrific gulag system, of course. And in the USSR, the former USSR alone, you can count about 20 million dead. And who else am I going to say next? Yeah, Mao Zedong. He was in power from 49 to 76. What they called land reform was just government taking land and killing the landowners. And then he had this program, Mao proposed this program called the Great Leap Forward. And I strongly encourage you to go just look at that standalone, just the Great Leap Forward from Mao. Somewhere in the neighborhood of 40 to 45 million people were starved to death. Then the Cultural Revolution ensued. Yeah. And the total body count under communist China, about 65 million so far. And then other notable, Pol Pot in Cambodia was another notable one. And that, hey, only about 2 million people were murdered there. Yeah, no big deal, right? Under communist Cambodia. North Korea, Ethiopia, it goes on for the countries that were ruled by the communists and the body count. If you look at consensus, and there's some different numbers out there, no numbers are exactly matching, but conservative count, and this is there's a book out there called the Black Book of Communism. But if you look at other research along with that book and stuff like that, they put the communist death toll at about 100 million. About 100 million. From executions, manufactured famine, gulags, political enemy, purging. And if you want to compare, directly compare, they far exceeded whatever the Nazis did. The Nazis were ruthless and cruel, and so was communism. So to not look at those with the same level of scrutiny is disingenuous or ignorant, one or the other. And never mind the Nazis, those numbers exceed anything resembling anything remotely Western, capitalist, democratic republic, etc., etc. Every communist regime followed the same format: centralized power, right? Centralized control. Get rid of class enemies or political enemies. Get rid of them. Followed directly by tyranny and famine. That's the way it is. And why did it follow the same path? Because that's the inevitable result. That might not even have been the playbook. That's just the way those plays inevitably play out. Yeah, man. Communism sucks. You won't ever convince me otherwise. I hope to convince you that it does. And I hope if you're like a hard lefty, there's nothing wrong with liberal politics in America. But the further left you go and you start getting into Marxist, Leninist ideology, you're off the reservation. So let's look at some modern practitioners of capitalism. I mean, communism, because some of them now they've started to pervert, right? They've started to dilute a little bit because pure communism doesn't work. China is all about capitalism to the degree that the state still makes the decisions, but they're happy to buy and sell products around the world, right? So you could call that a sort of a hybrid sort of system, but it's still state owned, right? What about Cuba? They have chronic shortages of everything all the time. Everybody says, "Oh, you can go to Cuba and get free medical." Well, yeah, but they're holding their doctors as slaves because being a doctor, I mean, you can't make a living, right? North Korea, everything's all very pristine and ordered. And satellites go, everything's pristine. But you guys have seen, yeah, they got stores set up with with facades of food and products. But the reality is there's no food and products. They starve their people. And they have political prisoner camps over there as well. Well, not just political prisoners, but any prisoners. What about Venezuela? Yeah, man. In South America, Venezuela at one time was the most wealthy country. They had the highest oil production, possibly in the world at one time. And what happened? They nationalized oil production. Now what are they doing? They're eating rats. They went into a state of, and you can blame America if you want. Blame America. Sure. Go ahead. America didn't nationalize the goddamn oil trade. All right. So, oh, well, had they not pressured or snatched up Maduro, they would be doing fine. No, they weren't doing fine at all. And under Chavez, oh my God. Don't even get me started on Chavez and like Sean Penn. Meanwhile, people are starving in the streets, starving. And they're eating this opulent meals at these galas and whatnot because Sean Penn's Venezuela. Vietnam, Laos, over there in Southeast Asia. The communists won, right? People love to throw it up that Vietnam was a big mistake. Whatever, maybe it was. It definitely was. But the communists won. Well, what happened over there? They had to eventually adopt some form of capitalism. They eventually had to ditch pure communism to survive, and they did. And they're surviving, right? But the communists still run the show. So if we look at some very direct contrasts, you can look at North and South Korea. There's a meme going around. You see it all the time where at night, satellite looks down and you see a very distinct line. South Korea is all lit up and booming. North Korea is blacked out. You can say that's for good or bad or whatever, but those people, the North and South, started from the same place at the same time, but they went on two different systems. And now South Korea is booming and has been. It's a technical powerhouse. And it's essentially a westernized democracy, if you want to call it that. Look at the direct contrast of pre-Castro Cuba and post-Castro Cuba. Yeah. Now, there's not that many people old enough to remember that that Cuba was a booming, like, touristy place and gambling, and the rich people went down and all that stuff. Havana, and then once Castro took it over, all that shit. Well, America sanctioned them and embargo, blah blah blah. Don't don't blame America for the system that their greedy ass leaders chose. What about, here's another good direct comparison. Hong Kong pre-97, when Great Britain still owned Hong Kong. Hong Kong was thriving, man. Remember the Bruce Lee days? Hong Kong was going to be another. They had a Hong Kong Hollywood. It was all right. And then when it went back to China, I mean, they're probably still booming in a way, but nothing like it was. What does that? Okay, what does that tell us anyway? Those are good comparisons, and they're valid comparisons. Don't don't think there's any gotcha thing in there or any, but what about or what if? Those are good comparisons and legitimate. But what that shows us is that government centralized planning fails because you still have flawed humans up there making decisions, but now they're making it with a very limited perspective. Capitalist leaning nations consistently always deliver higher standard of living for the individual guy, for the individual family, for the ability to chase your dreams, to create, etc., etc. But communism does, in fact, deliver equality. What am I going to say next? Everybody's equally poor, except for the party. Except for the party. So, and I'm going to say something cynical here, but this is what I believe about a lot of the leftist sort of elite. They believe in a pure communist society, that they would be among the advisors in the party. You know, they would be in the in crowd there. So they would get their steak, they would get their wine. Yeah, that's what I think about that. So anyway, democratic socialism is just communism with better freaking public relations. The end game is the same. Total state control. That's the end game. And the state can, when I say control, I mean over means of production. That's the catchphrase everybody loves. Means of production. And ultimately over our lives. How many kids we can have. Look at China. Things we're allowed to say or not, et cetera, what we're allowed to. Now, one of my favorites, Ayn Rand, said, there's no difference between communism and socialism except in the means of achieving the same ultimate end. Communism proposes to enslave men by force, socialism by vote. It's merely the difference between murder and suicide. I like that. I believe that. I think that's very succinct. So me saying all this and railing on, why are young people so Why do they fall for it? Why are they still pulled in by it? Why? Well, one, it offers sort of a fantasy of this benevolence, but it's false, right? It's not real benevolence. But they offer that. Like, don't you want poor people to be able to eat? Don't you want to be, whatever, man? Don't you care for the poor and marginalized? Yeah, of course. Excuse me. Messed up there. Yeah, of course I care for the poor and marginalized. Of course I do. It sells empathy, but it sells it with zero accountability. And it completely ignores the fact that free markets have outperformed, right? That have lifted millions out of poverty more so than any of this communist redistribution madness ever has. And then it's emotional, right? It appeals to emotion, and young people are emotional. Yeah. I'd say I was a little bit of a lefty when I was young. Was. If you're not, I don't know who said it. Someone said, if you're not a lefty when you're young, you have no heart. If you're not conservative when you're old, you have no brain. I think that's right. It's emotional though, and then you got all the social medias in it, and it loves on all this equity and this DEI and this, and then you have all these celebrity endorsements. You got Pink telling everybody don't listen to my music, man. You got Sean Penn going to Venezuela, to Cuba, to indulge in this excess that nobody else has access to. But on Instagram now, it looks good. You got the universities, they're all liberal, and they're just echo chamber. They just funnel in it because these professors don't show the students the goddamn bread lines or the realities of the secret police or mass graves. They don't show that. That's a result. That's something else happened. That's not a result of communism. That's, that's bullshit. So whether it's on purpose or out of ignorance, it is absolute disregard for human nature. I've said it all the time. I always say that. I say that all the time. Human nature. You can't legislate it. You can't politicize it. You can't policy it. It is very individual, and there are people that will take advantage of anything. Karl Marx assumed that people would work for the collective once the exploitation was eliminated. The reality is, without any private property, any chance of owning private property, or without any profit or loss incentive, or any incentive to innovate, why would you do it? If I work like a slave to produce XYZ, and that XYZ is given away freely, and I make whatever my allowance is, and given a free loaf of bread and some toilet paper, at some point I'm like, oh, what the fuck, man? Right? Is that selfish? No, it's not selfish. That's America. That's rugged individualism. We seek to create, well, maybe for the benefit of others, maybe for the benefit of ourselves, but you know that I believe that if we are our best selves, then we will be a benefit to others by default. And that's a fact. That's a fact. Self-interest, rightly understood, right? Rightly explained. So rational self-interest is in everyone's interest. That's it. Communism believes in no such thing. Communism brings everybody down to the lowest level and keeps them there. Takes any incentives away. It takes even the will to live away. You can look through history. There's no creativity. Any creativity that you have seen, there has been some awesome creativity come out of communist nations. It's so goddamn dark. It's dark. It's agony. Because communism breeds resentment. And then it forces coercion. So as you grow older, you'll realize, you'll start maturity, right? And you start to see consequences of actions and policies play out over the longer term. Then you realize, all right, I can see why communism was bad. I can see why when I was young I thought it was good, but now I see the result, and I see that that is absolutely horrible. And if you're a critical thinker, you can do that. Now, that said, the pushers of this ideology, these college professors who live in a bubble of a little ideologically protected bubble, they grow old and they never see the consequence. They avoid the consequence. They look at their manifesto and their text like so, and then they continue to push the same ideological BS that has no practical place in American society, Western society, any society for that matter. I've said it before, and I'll stand by it. Communism works on a scale of about 8 or 10 people, 20 people, maybe. But as soon as somebody gets in there with a different value system or a different set of desires and wants and needs than the group, it's done. Because then the manipulation starts. Well, I need to fulfill my needs. Oh, that's selfish, Edgar. Well, is it? Am I not allowed to have my own wants and needs? And if I have the will to go after those, am I not allowed to do so? Well, if you're a tyrannical communist dictator, then yes, that's what you think. No. Yeah. So young people are still pulled in, right? But I think maturity and I think critical thinking will get you out of it pretty quick. Or just go visit, go live in a communist country for about 3 months. If you want to put your money where your mouth is, go live in a communist country for about 3 months. And if you can get back out of that communist country and come back home, then you'll probably have a different perspective. So now I want to look at some of the contradictions that we see from these young idealistic people. Let's look at the First Amendment. Freedom of speech. Well, the left has already foregone the freedom of speech. Whenever they came out with hate speech, whenever that was, I can't remember, probably in the early 2000s, that you just usurped freedom of speech. There is no longer such a thing as freedom of speech. Well, do you want people to be able to say racist things, Edgar? Yep. Do you want people to be able to say hateful things, Edgar? Yep, I do. There's already laws that you cannot incite violence. We already know these things. But no, not only can we not incite violence, but you don't want anybody to be able to say anything you don't want to hear. So we have hate speech. Freedom of speech no longer exists. So they want to ban speech, certain speech on campus. But then they want to have safe spaces where then they can say whatever nonsense they want to say, as long as it's ideologically correct to them. That's it. In one recent case out there, there's black students at some university trying to segregate the university Barrett dorm system so they can have a safe place for black people only, or I'm sorry, POCs only. It's bizarre. It's hypocritical. What about Second Amendment? Now, look, I've done podcasts. There's liberals out there, gun club, private groups who are carrying guns these days. And that's great and good on them. But what's one of the first things communists take over? What's one of the first things that happens? They disarm the public. Why? So in the modern paradigm here, the lefties want to blame the gun. They want to ban the object, and they have no intention of putting any accountability onto the perpetrators, the actual people doing the crimes. They want to ban the gun. Well, they're ignoring that throughout history, that's what communists do. So they're not admitting communism openly, but they're doing all the communist things and then telling you you're crazy for calling them communists and a conspiracy theorist. And why do communists disarm people? Well, throughout history, yeah, armed insurrection is what has defeated tyrants. Yeah. What's some other good stuff? Lefties love to rage against the death penalty because the state shouldn't have, well, not the state, right? Everybody has a right to life. But then they'll go and bemoan a cop who like kills an armed violent protester, right? They bemoan that. They bemoan the death penalty. They bemoan death. But then vehemently, passionately defend and promote abortion. Don't roll your eyes if you're a lefty, right? If you're a lefty and you believe that, you either don't know when life begins or you don't care. One or the other. Or they celebrate. Remember Luigi Mangione? They would celebrate a young activist going and assassinating in cold blood a CEO of some insurance company on the streets of New York. Bullets to the back of the head. They celebrate that. He's glorified. He's a hero for that. So killing ain't wrong as long as it's for their ideology. That's hypocritical. It is not consistent. It is intellectually dishonest. Meanwhile, they completely ignore the body count. 100 million plus dead, starved, murdered. These days, still, communist countries will still disappear political dissidents. Hell, America disappears people but it's usually for some political criminal enterprise. Whereas communism, it's just, hey, this guy disagrees. He's vocal. Gone. Suicided. Somehow poisoned or somehow gunshot wound. Suicide to the back of the head. For a car accident with a single vehicle, no other vehicles involved. Lefties love to ignore that stuff. It happens all the damn time. So is life precious or not? Only if you believe the way they do. What else, man? I said earlier it's about, don't you want to help the marginalized and the poor? Yes, I do. Well, Edgar, socialism will ensure that the hungry get fed. Well, show me in history where that's the case. More than any other recession, right? We had the Dust Bowl, we had a Great Recession, and more than all those combined in American history, communism has starved scores more people than any recession, than any hard times. Yeah, that's it. The numbers don't lie on that. The numbers don't lie on it. What else do the lefties love? What else? Well, this victim and class, what I call role play, because it is role play, where there's a victim class. And if there's a victim, there must be an oppressor. The lefties, they love being the underdog, or they want you to believe they're the oppressed, right? The victim class. When they're out of power, especially, it plays up big style. But even when they're in power, they play up that they're the victims, but they're in charge. But once they gain power, the lefties, they impose their will, just like the righties do, right? So red and blue in America are one and the same. And they impose, whoever's got the majority is in Congress is getting their way. And even the left is as tyrannical as the right ever has been. And this is one of the most absurd things about friggin' Antifa, bemoaning, police brutality and whatnot. But then they go out in the street and are equally or more so brutal. Well, we're fighting fire with fire, Edgar. Well, then you don't, pardon, outro music. If you bemoan that and then you go out and replicate it with more force, then you're not against violence. You're simply against somebody else's violence. So you're a hypocrite. Yeah, you're a hypocrite. Or at least intellectually dishonest. Antifa. Very funny. really. The love affair with big government leads to sort of a incremental, slow motion loss of individual liberties and freedoms. And what is hate speech or some kind of suppression of speech today will turn into a suppression of thought tomorrow. I point you to the UK and I'll point you to Canada. That's around the corner if you don't get a handle on what our rights are in America. If you keep trying to manipulate them for some partisan BS. All right, let's go back in time a little bit. The Communist Party USA existed, and it does exist. So in the civil rights era, now there's a lot of controversy there may be from this, but we'll talk it anyway. They befriended and partnered and infiltrated essentially the civil rights movement. And they did that not for the betterment of the black man. I promise you that. It was not for the betterment of black Americans. It was for the advancement of the communist they wanted a communist revolution. They wanted communist takeover for whatever bizarre reason, because they're in charge. And once you're in charge as a communist, you're in charge forever. And you can just, your inner circle, that they carry on forever, short of a armed revolution. So they didn't want true equality for the blacks. They just used the racial tension as a foothold and an impetus to push class warfare. That's what they did. And it's factual. It's on record. I'm not throwing you my opinion here. That's facts. And then, I mention this guy every now and again, Saul Alinsky. He worked with the communists and explicitly used what they called the have-nots to leverage political power. That's it. And he dedicated his infamous book, Rules for Radicals. I reference it a lot. He dedicated that to Lucifer, Satan, as the original radical. Is that the right team to be on? Is that the right team? I don't think so, man. Damn. And that book still influences. It's still the playbook. They still use every one of those techniques today. What about the Black Panthers? They were explicitly Marxist and Lenin. They said it, and they were armed. The Black Panthers were. That's part of the reason gun control is what it is today, is because they didn't want black people having guns. And whatever it is, what it is, doesn't change the fact that the Black Panthers were communists and armed, and they openly called for violent overthrow. They openly called for that. Huey Newton, who was the founder and leader throughout, like 60s and 70s and whatnot, he openly praised Mao and he openly praised Castro. And the irony is that both of those two men would at minimum have enslaved black Huey Newton or murdered him for whatever. Like, he was a useful idiot. He was a useful idiot for communist causes. And this is consensus among historians and scholars that the Communist Party USA used black Americans, and they used them as useful idiots to further their anti-American cause. They used black Americans to agitate politically to further their cause. Those are facts. Now, I'm going to be balanced here real quick, because I also hate big government, to include the FBI. Yes, the FBI was running a counterintelligence program back in those days, targeting Martin Luther King and Huey Newton, but also the KKK. Nobody's going to share that with you, but they also targeted white supremacy groups, and they targeted a lot of people. The problem is the majority of that targeting was illegal. The surveillance, illegal, warrantless, literally warrantless. And that's, J. Edgar Hoover, you can say what you want about him. I think he was this guy. I think he was wrong on a lot of levels. They used the FBI was, people say, oh, the FBI has become so political. The FBI has always been political. It was a political beast. Their whole purpose is to spy on anti-American, whatever, whoever's against the sitting system. Yeah, counterintelligence under the FBI. And the problem is it was so loose, right? Well, they could target people who are a threat to national security, but also who they deemed, let me quote, a threat to social order. What social order is that exactly? So yeah, FBI out of control. So they targeted people for political purpose only, which is not cool. The FBI was a political beast and exploited cultural divisions, which so did the Communist Party. So you can see how the grassroots quickly gets overshadowed by these bigger power plays. These people that would use the grassroots for their own ends. That's the way it is. I think, and I've said this before, I think probably Antifa in America was probably grassroots for about the first week. And then somebody saw profit in it. And then it got exploited. And now the founder of Antifa is living in like multi-million-dollar homes, 2 or 3, right? Under investigation for embezzlement. Human nature. Righty, lefty, doesn't matter. Commie, libertarian, human nature. She saw opportunity to enrich herself beyond her wildest imagination and took it and exploited it, therefore discrediting the whole movement. All right, so I got a few questions. These questions I formed for the lefties. So listen carefully. Listen carefully and take note. What draws you to the left? Now look, think about that critically. Don't say Donald Trump. All right, don't be deeper than that. I'm not talking about personality or whatever. I'm talking about larger ideology, philosophical ideology, not some a-hole car salesman. All right. So if you say Donald Trump, you're shallow and maybe you don't have the capacity to think deeper than that. But what draws you to the left? Do you have a genuine desire to care for the underprivileged and whatnot? Or are you shallow? Is it just a fashion statement because your favorite artist or rapper, whoever waves a red flag? I want you to think about the question. What draws you to the left? And then critically analyze whatever the answer is on it. All right, that's one question. Here's another. How far are you willing to take the ideology? Is it casual local politics, like you just want some leftist policies in your town? Or do you believe that the state, and when I say the state, I mean federal government, should control all aspects of life, to include how many kids you're allowed to have, or what kind of car you're allowed to drive, or whether or not they're going to put a cutoff switch in your car so that when you've driven whatever allowed number of miles, it stops and automatically returns back to the charging base, like a Roomba. How far are you willing to take it? And then if you're willing to take it all the way, right, you're like, hey, okay, good. What if so you give the power to the government to do that. Well, what if the guy in charge of making those decisions ain't your guy? Then what? Once you've given the power away, it's too late. All right. Another question. What incentivizes excellence and creativity under communism? What is the incentive to create and produce and excel under communism? Now, if you're in the ruling class, that's it. You got all the money. You got your prime rib. You can eat your tomahawk steak and sip on your wine in your opulent government provided apartment or 50-acre mansion. But what about the rest of us? What about the other 359.5 million people? What incentivizes creativity and productivity and excellence in communism? All right, here's the final question. When you gain power and implement this communism, will you still champion the underdog? Or will you become the new tyrant? Because you have to understand that what was the underdog is now going to, or the tyrant is now going to be the underdog. So you got in charge now, and now there's underdogs out on the street who believe different than you, but you're the prevailing power. Are you still for the underdog? Or do you know better? And you're going to enforce and impose your will because you think you know better. And when you do enforce your will and you do enforce communist policy, it will be at gunpoint. Yeah, it will be at gunpoint. Think about those things, folks. Those are for my lefty listeners. I want you to think about those things. All right, wrapping it up here. Look at the realities of the past communist regime, the current communist regimes. Read primary sources. Understand incentives. How incentives play in politics, and definitely reject any fantastical utopian friggin' answer that or shortcut. It don't exist. Understand that self-reliance is more important and more critical than state dependence. It's more fulfilling. It's more natural. Understand it. Share this episode, folks. If you got lefty friends and family, share the episode. Get them to listen to it. If only this one. Hey, check this out. See what you think. And see what the arguments are. And see if they hold water. See if they're legitimate. So what I'm going to put in the show notes is I'm going to throw 5 books at you. 5 books that are some of the most pivotal, most highly studied, informative books on communism today. Like they're nonfiction for sure, but they outline each of them the human cost of communism, the human individual cost of communism, and they have survivor testimonies. They have declassified, records and whatnot, and they have really solid historical analysis. And they all collectively put them together and they sort of make a big, total, broad, compelling argument against the ideology of communism and socialism because they tear down the core principles, which collectivism is one of them, of course, central planning, of course, and then obviously the single party dictatorship. In America, we bemoan a 2-party system. Imagine being under a communist dictatorship of one party. So they got a lot of good stuff in. They've shaped a lot of the academic views of communism, and I don't mean the lefty academic. I mean like proper, independently studied humans. And they show us that this pursuit of this mystical workers' paradise is false. It just leads to tyranny and death. That's it. But these books will give you a deeper understanding. So that's it, folks. That's what I had to say today. It was, why do young people, why are they lured into the communism? These are some of my thoughts. I might have been a little fragmented and rambling a little there, but these are some of my thoughts. So thanks for listening, folks. Please do share with your friends and family and whoever. Please share the podcast. Please comment if you have something to say about it. Please do. I'm always looking forward to it. to responding to the feedback. I love it. We got June coming up soon. We got the OSS Challenge, OSS to Green Beret Edition. That's June 6th. Plenty of space there. It's not even remotely filled up. That's sponsored by Athena Target Systems, and the Special Forces Foundation is to bring awareness for their cause. What else? I think this month we have a pistol workshop. We have the Sons of Liberty match at the end of the month. And we have June 13th, we have the Libertarian Party of Georgia Range Day. And there's going to be some barbecue for sale out there from Moe's Barbecue, Moe's Original Barbecue here in Rome. So bring an extra $20. Other than that, folks, thanks for listening. Please follow all the other stuff, twoteamguys.com. Of course, the website, thejuntopodcast.com. And then please, if you have this is the opposite of communism. I'm asking you for voluntary donations to the givesendgo.com/help a homie fund. This is the non-state grassroots way to help individuals out on the street who need it. So that's what we do there. So you give some money, I give money, and when I see someone on the street in a pickle, you give them some food, buy them some sneaks, whatever it is. Help single mothers with diapers. Yeah, anything we can do, we do. Now, this is in the scope of my circle. I hope to expand this circle one day. But meanwhile, that's what we're doing. All right, good people. I appreciate each and every one of you. Take care of each other. Be good to each other. All right? Love you guys. Take care.